In this video, we're going to learn about formula anchoring. This is also referred to as absolute referencing or relative referencing of a cell. You should be aware that the terms anchoring and absolute or relative reference can be used interchangeably when referring to formulas in Excel. As you know, a ship uses an anchor in order to prevent it from drifting when there's waves. It drops the anchor and it goes down to the ground and prevents the ship from drifting. I'd like you to think about the scriptures off to the right and how that anchor for a ship relates to our personal lives. That may help to make some connection with Excel as well. It basically follows the same concept. So in a spreadsheet, when we do formula anchoring or referencing, we put a cell reference, and if we anchor it, it will prevent the formula from referring to other cells when we drag or copy the formula across or down throughout the workbook. The best way to describe this is going to be to illustrate it. So I'm going to go to a cell here, and we have 7 individuals. Their annual salary, the percent of their salary that they have deducted to go to benefits, this would be like healthcare, or insurance deductions, dental, or 401k savings, all those kinds of things. And we also have what percent of their salary they would like to have deducted for their personal savings. And then, of course, at the top, we have tithing and tax. But without looking at that yet, let's just go in this cell here, cell G5, and refer to this cell here with Annie's salary in it. So if I refer to that cell and push enter, it will give me the same result as the original cell. If I take this formula and drag it over to the right, you'll see, if I copy the formats as well, that it gives me those exact same numbers. So basically, we can see that when I referred to our original cell, in G5, I referred to the cell C5, and then I dragged it over, and now it refers to the cell D5, and then E5. Similarly, if I select this whole row and drag it down, you'll notice that each cell references the corresponding relative cell relative to the first top left cell in our new grid here to the right. We've just illustrated relative referencing. To illustrate absolute referencing, also called anchoring, I'm going to select these 4 columns, right-click, and choose Insert. So if we start in this same cell, G5, and we reference C5, we'll now press the F4 key on your keyboard. You can also do this by just typing in these $ in front of the column C and the row 5. Those $ represent an absolute reference, or in other words, they've anchored the reference. So now when I press enter, you'll see it references that 45,000, just like our initial relative reference over here. But when I drag it across and when I drag it down, it maintains that same reference of cell C5. So I can label these here absolute and relative. So this example references both the row and the column in an absolute manner. If we select these 4 columns again and insert a new set of columns, now I will demonstrate if we want to reference only the row or the column. So here we'll press F4 again. If we continue and press F4 a second time, you'll see I've referenced now just the row. So in other words, the column will change as I drag it across to the right, but the row will remain as row 5. So if I press enter here, I can drag it over to the right. Again, we need to use the format painter here to make sure that we are seeing the same formats. And then we'll drag it down. So you'll notice it maintained the same row even though the column changed. Again, select these top columns, right-click, choose Insert, and now if we do the final example of absolute referencing, we can select this cell. We'll press F4 once, anchoring both the column and the row. We'll press F4 again, anchoring just the row, and then a final time, anchoring just the column. And again, with these dollar signs, you can just type them into the formula bar instead of using F4 if you run into issues with that. So here you can see that we've maintained the reference of the same column no matter what, but we do shift the rows down. So all of these are examples of different types of anchoring. Here you can see the dollar sign is in front of the row, so we'll call this row. And here the dollar sign is in front of the column, so we can call it column. But all three of these sections here are examples of absolute referencing. In other words, at least one part of the formula does not change as you copy or move the formula up and down or across the spreadsheet. Now that we've had some practice recognizing what absolute and relative references are and what the variance on those are, let's get back to these examples of these employees and their salary. We'll again insert a number of columns here by right-clicking and choosing Insert. And ultimately, we want to understand what their take-home pay is after their benefits, after their savings, and after their tax and tithing. So from this standpoint, I'm first going to get these rows a little bit of extra space since we'll represent these numbers as dollar amounts. First column, we want to understand what the benefit percentage is in dollar terms. So I'll label these columns benefits, savings, tithing, tax. And you'll notice we need one more additional column here for the final take-home pay. But what I can do is I can use the Format Painter now, paint these, and then I can actually insert one more column here, and it will inherit. You'll notice at the top here, it's inherited that currency format. So it's a good trick to just be aware of as you're manipulating worksheets. To calculate my benefits, I want to multiply my salary by the benefit percentage. But I don't want just a relative reference, because as I drag this across to do savings next, I'd like it to remain focused on the salary column, but allow the benefits column to shift over to now reference the savings column. So the way that I will do this is I will press F4 here, and now I've locked in both the row and the column. But I actually want the row to change as I drag it down. The way that I would do that is by removing the anchor for the row. Now, I can come in this cell and backspace out that dollar sign, or I can use the F4 button. In this case, I'll just backspace it out to demonstrate that that can be done. I then want to multiply that by my benefits percent. Now, I don't need to apply any absolute referencing to this second argument here, because the benefits percent will move as I move down the rows, and when I move to the next column, I actually want it to shift over to the savings percentage and reference that. So if we push enter, you'll see here, this is how much I'm taking out of my salary to pay for benefits. So if I drag it across now to the savings column, you'll see that it references the next column over for the percent, but it remains anchored on the salary column. So I can now take these two formulas and drag them all the way down, and you'll notice no matter where I click on them that they reference the appropriate salary column and benefits or savings columns. To look at another type of anchoring, we'll look at the tithing and tax. So if our tithing is 10% of our base, we would start by referencing the salary again. And just like we did last time, we want to keep the column the same. Now, as we reference the tithing percentage at the top, I can multiply that by this cell, and I want to anchor both the row and the column here. I do not want it to move, whether I drag it over to the right or down. I'll press enter here and drag that all the way to the bottom. Now, something to note here. While I did anchor the salary, technically we could have left that as a completely relative reference, except that thinking one step ahead, as I drag this formula over, it will remain in the salary reference here, but it still keeps its focus on tithing because we have that completely absolutely referenced. So instead, we will move that box down to tax, and again, you could type it here in the formula bar as well. And now when I push enter, it's referencing the correct percentage for tax and maintains the correct reference for salary. I need to now figure out what my take-home pay is after all of these things. We start off with the salary, and then we would subtract the sum of all of these different forms of deductions. And you'll notice I just selected right across. I can close that parenthesis, and I'm leaving this completely relatively referenced because I'm just going to be dragging it down the rows, and I want those references to move down the rows with me. So here's an example of how you can use absolute and relative referencing, also called anchoring. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of practicing and repracticing absolute and relative references. This skill is something that you will use constantly throughout your career in Excel. It is vital for this class, and it is vital to creating workbooks and worksheets that are fast and intuitive, both for you to create and for the user to use. It might be a little challenging to learn at first, but with practice and time, it will become second nature.